Roots. Dad.
Yeah, we really need to panel something.
Hello and welcome, I'm Adam Haig from 3D Games, and in this video I'll be showing you how to create a beautiful forest board like this. I created this one predominantly to be used for the Middle-earth strategy battle game, but it could be used for all sorts of different game types. For example, Star Wars Legion, it could represent the forest moon of Endor with ATSTs battling little Ewoks, or any kind of fantasy realm with a forest, or historical games that use forest and tree type terrain. This was a lot of fun to make. It was actually relatively easy using predominantly Woodland Scenics products, and didn't take too long, probably 2 solid days of work, but yeah, a lot of fun to make. And so without further ado, I'll get into it and show you how it was done. Cheers. To create an organic and varied look, draw a range of curved shapes onto MDF. Time for some power tool action. Use a jigsaw to cut around each shape. You don't have to be precise with this, just follow the general shape and use up as much of the MDF as possible. It's definitely a good idea to wear a mask when doing this, because MDF dust is not good to have in your lungs. Once all my shapes were cut out, I wanted to taper off the edges to help blend my terrain into my game board. To do this, I got out my Dremel and started rounding off the edges with the sanding bit.
One eternity later.
This is gonna take fucking ages. I'm gonna give bench grinder a go.
Using the bench grinder was a lot faster than using the Dremel. That being said, it still took me about 35 minutes to complete 18 bases. As you can see in the video, I also got covered in sawdust, so it's definitely a good idea to wear a mask. And don't wear your favourite jacket because it's gonna get filthy. The next step was to build up some landforms. This was to create some height variation in my forest and to avoid it looking too flat. To do this, I used bits of XPS foam to add small hills and undulations. I carved the basic shapes with a sharp craft knife. Using Sculpt-A-Mold later means you don't have to be precise with this. To add further variation, I created some small cliffs and rocky outcrops with Woodland Scenics rock molds. These were glued into place with a hot glue gun. I didn't have any specific plan here, I simply made it up as I went along. Sculpt-A-Mold comes next. Mix in water until the Sculpt-A-Mold takes on the consistency of cottage cheese. Then you need to work quite quickly because it starts to set after about 15 minutes. This is the part where you can bring out your inner child. Use your hands and fingers to build up land formations and smooth your hills into each base. Alternatively, of course, you could use plastering tools or gloves to avoid getting your hands dirty. Continue to work your way through each of your bases steadily and you'll find you get through them quickly. And it's actually a lot of fun. It certainly helps at this point to have an awesome and supportive wife feed you jalapeno poppers by hand so you can avoid getting plaster on these delectable treats. Once the Sculpt-A-Mold is all applied, it will be starting to firm up. It is a good idea at this stage to shape the sections between the plaster cast rocks so that it all blends naturally. Use a sculpting knife to create the texture of rocks with some cracks and lines and ridges. I then went ahead and undercoated my bases using rattle cans and airbrush, doing my best to avoid the plaster rocks. Of course, alternatively you could just slap down some paint with a paintbrush, easy as you like. The rocks were painted using the leopard spot technique. This process involves highly watered down paints and inks that is then dabbed onto the plaster. I used green, ochre and brown, then washed the entire surface with black. Unfortunately, my phone ran out of batteries at this point. Next, I went ahead and glued the tree mounts in place using super glue. It is a good idea to check the spacing and whether the trees will actually fit. The armatures I used were woodland, scenics, pine and deciduous trees. These are great for quickly bending into shape, but they do have some annoying mould lines. It depends on how closely you're going to be looking as to how much time you spend cleaning them up. Cutting off the odd branch helps to break up the uniformity and add realism. The pine armatures are very simple to twist into shape. Next, I applied watered down PVA to each base. I used a cheap hobby PVA for this, which works perfectly fine. A static grass applicator is an amazing investment for terrain building. It makes the application of static grass so simple and fun, albeit a bit messy. Those little fibres get everywhere. For the first coat, I used Woodland Scenics 4mm dark grass. You can see that with a single coat and colour, the bases look very unnatural. To remedy this, spray scenic glue over the desired areas, then sprinkle sand and soil before applying different coloured static grasses. For the second coat, I used Geek Gaming's 6mm burnt grass. Afterwards, I alternated spraying isopropyl alcohol and matte sealant to lock everything in place. As you can see, this has given the bases a much more natural and realistic look. Now that all the trees are in place, I have a lot of flocking work to do. For the majority of my trees, I will be using clump foliage to create a nice thick canopy. To stick them on, I used hobby tack. Painted onto the ends of branches and everywhere you'd expect to see leaves. Then you're supposed to wait till it dries clear. I waited for over an hour and most of it was still showing white, probably because it was humid and freezing in my garage. My impatience won the day and I got stuck in. To apply, simply press the armatures into the clump foliage and it should stick. Then, using your fingers, press them more firmly into place. This stuff is crazy tacky, and I ended up getting sticky fingers, don't forget that covered in little bits of foliage. This doesn't wash off easily. Good old isopropyl alcohol would probably do it. I used foliage with different shades of green to represent different species and to create variation. I had a go using coarse turf for added variety. The blended turf was an epic fail, too weedy looking. Nothing a little clump foliage won't fix. Stick with it and your forest will start to take shape. To finish off, soak the foliage with matte sealant. You may have to do several coats on this depending on how strong you want your trees to be. You could also go ahead and add extra details like fallen branches and ground cover. And here is the finished product in all its leafy glory. Overall, I'm very happy with how my trees turned out, and I look forward to seeing them representing the woods of Ithilien, providing cover to my Gondorian ranges, or representing the forests of Endor for my speeder bikes and ATST to crash through. Thanks for watching, and please hit subscribe to see more 3D games content, including these guys fighting it out in an upcoming Battle Companies campaign.
Cheers, guys.